The stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of the dusty hotel in Hays City, Kansas, and Sarah Walker stepped down, her heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and fear. In less than an hour, she would meet the man she had promised to marry, a stranger whose letter had been kind but whose true nature was still unknown. It was late summer, and the Kansas heat pressed down on the small town like a heavy blanket. Sarah smoothed the travel-worn fabric of her dress and tried to steady her breath. One of the trunks that the driver pulled from the coach contained her secret, a talent she had kept hidden for years. She was ready for the practical life she had promised. But would he be ready for the woman she really was? She glanced at the hotel clerk, who gave her a polite nod, then hurried inside to find a small room to change. As she climbed the narrow staircase, her mind churned. She'd never met Samuel Graves in person, only through a series of brief but earnest letters. He was a rancher, tall and strong, with a life shaped by hard work on the frontier. He had described his ranch with a tone that suggested stability, a place to build a future if she was willing to give it a try. But she slipped into a simple blue dress with lace at the collar. She couldn't shake the gnawing feeling of uncertainty. She had promised herself a new life here, far from the crowded house in St. Louis with her stepfather's children. At 23, she was too old to be sitting idle while life passed by. But was this life with a stranger truly what she had been seeking? A soft knock at the door snapped her from her thoughts. The clerk's voice called through the wood. "Mr. Graves is waiting in the lobby, Miss Walker." Her heart quickened as she placed her hand on the doorknob. She had come so far for this moment, and in mere minutes her future would be set. She couldn't stop the tremor in her hand as she turned the knob. The lobby was small and dimly lit, with a single lantern hanging by the door. A few men sat at a table in the corner, murmuring quietly over their drinks, but her eyes were immediately drawn to the man standing near the window, Samuel Graves. He was taller than she had imagined, with broad shoulders that spoke of a life of hard physical work. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he wore a crisp white shirt under a vest, but his hands were weathered, showing signs of years spent in the sun. His brown eyes met hers as she stepped into the room, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "Miss Walker," he said, his voice low and warm. He stepped forward and took her hand in his grip gentle but firm. "I'm glad you made it safely." The nervous flutter in her stomach began to settle, and she met his gaze, seeing honesty there. "Thank you. The journey was long, but I'm here." He nodded and gave a slight smile. "I thought we might have supper before we talk any further. I know you must be tired, but I figured it'd give us time to settle in before making any decisions." His thoughtfulness surprised her, and she felt a small sense of relief. She hadn't expected to feel anything like comfort so quickly. "That sounds very kind," she said softly. They walked together through the heat of the evening toward a small restaurant down the street. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and welcoming. The smell of beef stew and freshly baked bread filled the air, and Sarah's stomach gave a quiet rumble, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since breakfast. They sat at a corner table, the only sound between them the occasional clink of silverware as they sat down. For a moment, there was an awkward silence as they both looked for words. Sarah studied him from across the table, trying to get a sense of the man she was about to marry. His face was open, his eyes kind, and yet there was something about him that seemed unsure, as if he, too, was waiting for something. "So tell me about your home," Samuel said, his deep voice breaking the silence. "I've heard a lot about St. Louis, but I can't imagine it's much like Hays City." Sarah smiled softly. "It's not, that's for sure. It's crowded and noisy, always full of people and carriages and horses, but it's all I've ever known. It's been a little too much for me." Quote. She didn't know why she said that. There was something in his presence that made her feel like she could be honest in a way she hadn't been before. Samuel studied her, his brow furrowing slightly. "I can see how that might get tiring. I know the city's life can be overwhelming. That's why I came out here, to build something with my hands, something that would last." They spoke a little more about the city, then the conversation turned to their families. Samuel mentioned his parents, who had both passed when he was young, a subject Sarah understood all too well. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said quietly. "Thank you." He paused, his eyes distant for a moment. "It's part of why I came out here, to start fresh. To build something. Something more than just a ranch." Sarah took a slow breath, watching him. She could see that he, too, was running from something, or perhaps running towards something. After a time, the conversation drifted to the practicalities of their marriage, what would be expected, how their lives would be shaped. But every so often, she found herself wondering if she was making the right choice, if this man could truly accept her for who she was. Not just the woman who could manage a house, but the woman who had learned to fix watches with her father. "I'll be honest with you, Miss Walker," Samuel said as they finished their meal. "This life is hard, and sometimes it's lonely, but I believe we can build something good if we work together." Sarah nodded slowly. She could hear the sincerity in his voice, and for the first time she felt the weight of her decision settle with a little less pressure. "I'm not afraid of hard work," she said. They finished their meal, and Samuel stood to help her with her coat. The evening was cooler now, and the walk back to the hotel was quiet. Samuel kept a respectful distance, but she felt the beginnings of something. A bond, perhaps, or simply the understanding that this was only the first step on a long journey. As they reached the hotel door, Samuel paused. "I'd like to marry you tomorrow morning, if you're willing, if we're both still in agreement." Quote. She met his eyes, and in that moment, Sarah made her decision. "I am willing," she said softly, and she meant it. The next morning, Sarah woke early, the sun barely rising above the Kansas prairie. The events of the previous evening felt like a dream. She had come so far, and now her future was just a few hours away. She stood by the window in her room, gazing out at the quiet street, wondering what her life would be like after today. It was still early when she made her way downstairs to meet Samuel. Her nerves twisted again, but this time, there was something different. A flicker of excitement mixed with her hesitation. The wedding would be simple, no grand ceremony, just a small service in the town church. The hotel clerk greeted her with a nod, and she stepped out into the cool morning air. Samuel was already waiting by the church, standing tall and broad in his dark suit, his face serious but kind. The sight of him waiting for her sent a ripple of warmth through her. "You're early," she said, walking toward him. "I wanted to be sure I was here first," Samuel replied, his voice steady. He took a step forward, extending his hand to her. "I've been thinking a lot about this. About you. I want you to know I'm ready to make this work." Sarah hesitated, her eyes meeting his. The sincerity in his words eased some of the nervous tension in her chest. "I'm ready, too," she said softly, her voice carrying more certainty than she felt. The preacher arrived shortly after, and they walked together into the modest church, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the quiet building. Inside, the soft light of early morning filtered through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the wooden pews. The ceremony was simple, almost too quick. The preacher's words were brief, but his sincerity made them feel profound. Samuel's grip on Sarah's hand was firm, his thumb gently brushing over her skin as they exchanged vows. There was no grand promise of passion or fireworks, just quiet, solid assurances of partnership and respect. When it was over, they stepped outside into the morning light, now fully married. The weight of the moment settled between them, but it didn't feel heavy. For the first time since arriving in Hays City, Sarah felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. After the ceremony, they rode out to Samuel's ranch together. The wagon jolted along the uneven road, the Kansas prairie stretching out before them, wide and empty. The grass swayed in the wind, rippling like an ocean, and the sky above them seemed endless, its blue hue deepening as they drove farther from town. Sarah looked around, taking in the vastness of it all. It was beautiful in its own way, but also lonely. She could see why Samuel loved it here. There was a freedom in the open land, a promise of something simple and enduring. But would she be able to settle into this life? The thought lingered, but she pushed it aside. She had made her decision, and now it was time to live it. The ranch came into view as they crested a rise in the road. It wasn't grand, but it was solid. A small house made of timber with a stone chimney rising from the center. Nearby, a barn and a few outbuildings stood against the horizon, their simplicity matching the landscape. "This is it," Samuel said, pulling the wagon to a stop in front of the house. He glanced over at Sarah, his expression unreadable. But there was something in his eyes, perhaps a question, perhaps an unspoken hope. She climbed down from the wagon, her boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. The air was thick with the scent of earth and wild sage, and she felt a momentary flicker of discomfort. This was her new home, but it was nothing like the small house in St. Louis or the dream of a family home she had imagined. It was quieter, more isolated, and far less familiar. As they walked inside, the house felt colder than she had expected. The single room served as both kitchen and living area. A simple iron stove nestled against one wall, and a small table in the center. 2 doors led off to the side, one to a small bedroom and the other to what appeared to be a storage room. Samuel placed Sarah's trunk down near the corner and turned to her, his face softening. "I know it's not much, but it's home. You'll have everything you need here." Sarah nodded, taking in the room's simplicity. It wasn't the grand house she had imagined, but it would do. She was willing to make it work, just as Samuel had said. "I'll get the fire going," Samuel said, stepping toward the stove. "I'll show you the rest of the place after breakfast. There's a creek out back, and some good pasture land for cattle. I've got a few hens coming in for the roundup later this week, but it'll mostly be us for now." "Sounds good," Sarah replied, surprised by how much more at ease she felt after hearing his words. There was something about the quiet strength in Samuel's voice that made her feel as if they could face whatever challenges came their way. The quiet moments of their first morning together felt almost like a slow awakening. As they sat down to eat the breakfast she had prepared, simple fare of eggs, bread, and bacon, the silence between them felt comfortable, not awkward. There was no rush, no pressure. The world outside was vast and untouched, but for now, it was just the two of them in this small house on the prairie, building something new. After the meal, Samuel showed Sarah the rest of the ranch. They walked together across the land, the morning sun now rising higher in the sky. He pointed out the cattle, the outbuildings, and the area where he planned to expand in the future. He told her about the work that needed to be done, about the seasons that dictated everything. Sarah's mind, however, kept drifting back to the hidden talent she had brought with her, her secret. It had been her father's gift to her, one she had kept locked away for years, afraid that revealing it would make her seem strange. But now, in the silence of the ranch, with the weight of the moment settling in, she found herself wondering if she could finally share that part of herself with Samuel. She had told him many things in her letters, how she could cook and sew, manage a home, and keep the ranch in order, but never the full truth. She could repair watches, a skill she had learned from her father, a skill she had hidden away in the bottom of her trunk. Would he think it odd? Would he understand? As the day passed and the sun began to sink behind the hills, Samuel stood next to her, looking out over the land. His hand brushed against hers, and she felt a spark of connection. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his voice gentle. Sarah hesitated. "I have something to show you." He turned to her, raising an eyebrow. "What is it?" Quote. Taking a deep breath, Sarah led him back to the house, to the corner where her trunk stood. She opened it slowly, the quiet sound of leather creaking under her hands. She reached inside and pulled out a small cloth bundle, her heart pounding as she laid it in front of him. "Is that?" Samuel started, watching as she unwrapped the cloth to reveal the small tools, a set of delicate screwdrivers, tiny pliers, and watch parts neatly arranged. Her breath caught as she looked up at him, unsure of what to expect. "I can fix watches. I learned from my father." Quote. The silence between them stretched long before Samuel spoke, his gaze softening. "You're full of surprises, Sarah Walker." And in that moment, something between them shifted. Samuel's gaze lingered on the tools Sarah had spread out on the table, his expression unreadable. The silence between them felt heavy, as if the air itself had thickened with the weight of her confession. She watched him, her heart racing in her chest, but when he looked up at her, there was something in his eyes that made the tension ease. "That's quite a skill you've got there," he said, his voice steady. He reached out to touch the tools, his fingers brushing over the small pieces. "I never would have guessed you could do something like this." Sarah felt a rush of relief at his acceptance, but there was still a part of her that feared he might think her strange. She had kept this secret for so long, unsure how anyone would react. "I've been fixing watches since I was 12, she said softly, meeting his gaze. "My father taught me. It was what he did before he died. I never really thought much of it, just something to do with my hands." "That's remarkable," Samuel said quietly, his voice carrying a warmth she hadn't expected. "And it's not strange at all. It's just a talent, a gift. If anything, it's a blessing." His words, simple and sincere, settled over her like a warm blanket. For the first time, she felt truly seen, not just as the woman who could cook and clean, but as someone with depth, someone who carried more within her than anyone had ever guessed. They spent the rest of the evening in quiet companionship. Samuel showed her the layout of the ranch, explaining the daily routines that kept everything running smoothly. He introduced her to the horses, the cattle, and the small vegetable garden he had started behind the house. There was much work to be done, but Sarah felt something stir inside her. There was purpose here, something real she could grasp onto. It wasn't just about survival. It was about building something together, creating a life from the ground up. Later that night, after they had finished dinner, Sarah found herself standing outside on the porch, looking up at the vast expanse of the night sky. The stars shone brightly above, their light seemingly endless, and she couldn't help but marvel at how far she had come in such a short time. She had left everything behind, her family, the city, the life she had known, and now, here she was, standing on the edge of something new. The prairie stretched out before her, wide and empty, but also full of possibilities. This was her life now. She didn't know exactly what it would look like yet, but she was starting to see the shape of it, and maybe, just maybe, she could begin to believe that it was worth the risk. Samuel stepped out onto the porch beside her, the creak of the wooden steps beneath his boots announcing his arrival. He didn't speak at first, but his presence was enough. There was no pressure, no expectation, just the quiet between them, broken only by the sound of the wind rustling through the grass. "You're quiet tonight," Sarah said, glancing at him. He shrugged, his broad shoulders moving under his shirt. "Just thinking," he said, "about all the work ahead of us and what it'll take to make this ranch something real. It's a lot of work, but I think we can do it." His words echoed what she had been feeling all day, the weight of the future, the uncertainty of it. But there was something else in his voice, too, a quiet confidence that somehow made her believe that, together, they could face whatever came their way. "I know it's not going to be easy," Sarah said, her voice soft, "but I'm ready. I want to be part of this, Samuel. I want to help you build something here." He turned to her then, and in the dim light of the porch, she saw the surprise in his eyes. "I'm glad you said that," he said quietly. "I didn't want you to feel like you were just stuck here with me. This has to be something we both work for, together." It was a simple statement, but it made her heart feel lighter, as if some invisible weight had been lifted. There was no expectation, no burden of being something she wasn't. She could be herself here, and that, she realized, was more than she had ever hoped for. The next few weeks passed in a blur of adjustment and hard work. Sarah threw herself into the daily routines, learning how to manage the chores of the ranch, helping Samuel with the cattle, and even spending a few hours every morning on her watch repairs. She was careful at first, unsure of how Samuel would feel about her taking time away from the ranch work to focus on her own craft, but to her surprise, he didn't mind at all. In fact, he encouraged her, telling her that if she could make a business out of it, she could help support the ranch in a way that he couldn't. The thought of running her own small business, of building something from the ground up just as Samuel was doing, filled her with a quiet excitement. It wasn't just about the watches. It was about the freedom to create, to be something more than just a wife. She had never thought of herself as a craftsman, but now she was beginning to see how her talent could fit into this new life. One afternoon, as the heat of the summer sun began to wane, Samuel asked her to accompany him to the nearby town to gather supplies. He needed to pick up a few things for the ranch, and Sarah, eager to get out of the house, was more than happy to go. The town was small, barely more than a few dusty streets lined with shops and saloons, but there was a bustling energy to it. Farmers, ranchers, and settlers mingled in the marketplace, exchanging goods and news. As they made their way down the main street, Samuel paused in front of a small shop with a faded sign that read, "Antique Goods and Repairs." "This is where we can get the supplies for your work," he said, gesturing toward the door. "I talked to the owner a few weeks back. He's got some old parts, one think you could use." Sarah felt a flutter of excitement as they entered the shop, the cool air inside offering a welcome respite from the heat. The walls were lined with shelves filled with everything from old furniture to strange knickknacks. But it was the back corner, where the piles of watch parts and tools were stacked, that caught her eye. The owner, an older man with a white beard, greeted them with a nod. "Ah, Miss Walker," he said. "You're the one who's been fixing watches. I've got a few pieces here I think you might find interesting." As Sarah examined the parts, she realized how much she had missed this. The delicate mechanisms, the tiny gears and springs. This was her world, the place where she felt most at home. And now, she had a chance to make it part of the life she was building with Samuel. She turned to him, a smile lighting up her face. "I think this is going to work," she said, her voice filled with quiet excitement. "This could be the start of something." Samuel looked at her, his expression soft. "I've always known you had a special gift," he said, "and I'm proud of you for following it." In that moment, Sarah felt something inside her shift, an understanding that this was not just a life she had stumbled into, but one she had chosen. And she was ready to embrace it, fully and completely. The days turned into weeks, and the ranch began to feel more like home with each passing sunrise. Sarah found herself waking early, the sounds of the prairie and the creak of the old house settling into a rhythm she came to cherish. She learned the way the wind shifted in the late afternoon, how the cattle grazed in the cool mornings, and how to make a hearty stew that would feed Samuel after a long day in the fields. But it wasn't just the work that made her feel connected to this new life. It was the quiet moments, the simple exchanges with Samuel. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic confessions of love, but a steady, dependable closeness that deepened with every shared task, every meal prepared side by side, every glance exchanged over the dinner table. And then there was her watch repair business. What had started as a quiet, personal hobby began to grow. Word of her talent had spread through the nearby towns, and soon she was receiving more watches than she could handle, some from as far away as Denver. She worked diligently in the small corner of their home that she had turned into a makeshift workshop, carefully polishing the tiny gears, replacing springs, and adjusting the delicate mechanisms. Samuel watched her with quiet pride. At first, he had been unsure about her taking time away from the ranch to focus on her craft, but as he saw how it brought her joy, and as he noticed the small amount of money she was earning from it, he began to fully support her. He even built her a small workbench, and sometimes, when the day's work was done, he would sit in the chair beside her while she worked, listening to the rhythmic tick of the watches as she carefully adjusted them. "Do you ever wonder if these old watches hold more than just time?" Samuel asked one evening, as Sarah adjusted a particularly old pocket watch. "I mean, they've seen so much, carried so many stories." Sarah paused for a moment, considering his words. "I think you're right," she said softly, not looking up from her work. "Each one has a history, a life, just like us." Quote. Samuel leaned back in his chair, his gaze soft as he watched her work. "I like that. It makes these pieces feel more alive somehow." Her heart warmed at his words, and she smiled without realizing it. There was something about the way he saw the world, something that made her feel seen, too. He didn't just accept her for what she could do for him or for the ranch. He accepted all of her, the quiet, the thoughtful, the parts she had kept hidden for so long. As the months passed, the ranch continued to thrive. Samuel expanded the herd, and they made plans for a small barn to house new livestock. With Sarah's watch business doing well, the ranch was becoming more than just a way of life. It was a partnership, something they were both building together. But it wasn't just the work that held them together, it was the trust. The way Samuel would always ask her opinion before making a decision, the way he listened when she spoke, whether it was about the watches or the day's tasks or her hopes for the future. And then, one evening as they sat together on the porch after dinner, Samuel surprised her with something she hadn't expected. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice quieter than usual, "about the future, about us." Sarah turned toward him, her brow furrowing slightly. "What do you mean?" He hesitated for a moment, then continued, his words careful. "I know we've only been married a few months, but I'm starting to feel like we've been building something. Not just the ranch, but something more. I've come to realize how much I need you here, Sarah. Not just as a wife, but as a partner. Someone to share everything with." Her heart fluttered at his words, and she found herself staring at him for a moment, unsure of how to respond. He had always been steady and practical, never one to express his feelings too openly. But now, as he looked at her with such earnestness, she saw the depth of his commitment, and it took her breath away. "I need you too," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "More than I ever thought I would." Quote. Samuel reached out, taking her hand gently in his. The warmth of his touch sent a wave of calm through her, and she realized just how much she had come to rely on him, not just for support, but for the quiet love they had built together. The unspoken bond between them was stronger than anything she had ever expected. "There's one thing I've been thinking about," Samuel continued, his voice still soft. "I want to give you something I've been saving for it." Sarah looked up at him, confused. "What do you mean?" Samuel stood up and walked to the door of the house, returning a moment later with a small wooden box in his hands. He set it down in front of her, his eyes meeting hers with a hint of nervousness. Opening the box slowly, Sarah gasped when she saw what lay inside. A delicate silver watch polished to a gleaming shine. The craftsmanship was exquisite, far beyond anything she had ever seen before. It was as if it had been made just for her. "I thought you might like something of your own," Samuel said quietly. "Something to remind you that you're more than just a wife on this ranch. You're someone who has something special. I'm proud of you, Sarah. Proud of everything you've done." Her breath caught in her throat as she reached out to touch the watch, her fingers tracing the smooth surface of the metal. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. It's beautiful." Samuel smiled softly, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I thought you might like it." She looked up at him, her heart swelling with affection. "Thank you," she said simply. "This means more to me than you know." The watch was more than just a gift. It was a symbol of everything they had built together. The trust, the respect, and the love that had grown between them. It was a reminder that no matter where their journey took them, they would always be partners, building something that was worth more than just survival. And in that moment, Sarah knew that she had finally found the place where she truly belonged. The ranch continued to grow, just as the bond between Samuel and Sarah did. Each day, they carved out a little more of their life together, filling the spaces with hard work, quiet conversations, and shared moments of joy. The routines that had once felt foreign to Sarah now felt comforting, familiar. She could wake with the sunrise, feel the crisp morning air, and know exactly what her day would hold. There was a rhythm to it, and in that rhythm, she found peace. Her watch repair business had expanded even more, with customers traveling from neighboring towns to have their timepieces fixed. Samuel's pride in her only grew as the weeks passed, and he began to boast to the few neighbors they had about her skill. Sarah was hesitant at first, not wanting to draw attention to herself, but his quiet support made her feel more confident than she had in years. One afternoon, as she worked on a particularly delicate pocket watch in her small workshop, Samuel entered the room, a thoughtful look on his face. "Sarah," he began, his voice more serious than usual. "I've been thinking about something. About us." She set the watch down carefully, her hands suddenly still. "What do you mean?" He walked toward her, his boots sounding heavy on the wooden floor. "I want us to expand. I've been working on a plan for the future, and I think it's time we take it to the next level. Not just the ranch, but everything." She raised an eyebrow, curious. "What do you mean, take it to the next level?" Quote. Samuel smiled, a hint of excitement in his eyes. "I want us to build a real business, you and me, together. I know you've always had a gift with watches, and I've seen how much people value your work. I've been thinking about how we can take that and make it something bigger. We could open a proper shop in town, maybe even expand to other towns. We'd build something we could both be proud of." Sarah's heart quickened at the thought. She had always dreamed of something more, but she had never imagined it would be something like this. To think that Samuel believed in her talent enough to want to build something together, something that wasn't just about the ranch, but something that would last beyond it, filled her with an unexpected warmth. "I don't know what to say," she said quietly, a mix of excitement and uncertainty in her voice. "It's a big step. I've never done something like that before." "You don't have to do it alone," Samuel replied, his voice steady. "We'll do it together. You've been working on watches for years. You know this world, I know the ranch. Together, we can make it work. I've saved some money for a building in town. It's not much, but it's a start." The weight of his words settled in her chest, and for the first time she truly believed in the possibility of something bigger than they had ever imagined. She had never considered her skill could turn into a business. She had always seen it as something personal, something small. But Samuel saw it differently. He saw it as part of their shared future, as part of the life they were building together. She met his gaze, her heart full. "I think I'm ready to try." Samuel's smile widened, a genuine warmth filling his expression. "I knew you would be. We've already built so much together. This is just the next step." They spent the following weeks preparing. Samuel worked tirelessly on expanding the ranch, getting everything ready for the winter season, while Sarah made plans for the shop. They found a small building in town, just big enough for what they needed, and with Samuel's help, they began transforming it into the shop Sarah had always dreamed of. On the day they opened, the entire town seemed to show up. The excitement was palpable, the air thick with anticipation. People from all over had heard about Sarah's talent, and now they were eager to see it firsthand. Samuel stood beside her, proud and supportive, as she opened the doors to her new business. The shop was a success from the start. Sarah worked on watches during the day, and in the evenings, Samuel would join her to talk about the ranch, making plans for the future. He continued to support her, never once doubting her ability to make it work. It wasn't just about the watches anymore. It was about them, about the life they were building together, about the strength they had found in each other. The shop became a symbol of their partnership, of their willingness to work side by side to create something real. And as the business grew, so did their connection. But even as things became more successful, they still faced challenges. Winter arrived early that year, and with it came the usual hardships. The cold made everything harder. The cattle needed extra care, the woodpile had to be restocked, and the wind howled across the prairie, making even the simplest tasks feel like monumental efforts. One particularly harsh night, Sarah and Samuel found themselves alone in the house after a long day of work. The wind outside had turned bitter, and the fire in the hearth crackled softly in the quiet room. They sat side by side, Sarah's hands resting on her lap, Samuel leaning back in his chair, a slight frown on his face. "Hard night?" Sarah asked, breaking the silence. Samuel nodded, rubbing his hand over his face. "It's been a long season. The cattle are doing okay, but we're going to need some good weather if we're going to make it through the next few months." Sarah reached out, placing her hand over his. "We've faced worse, and we've made it through." Samuel looked at her then, his eyes softening. "You're right, we've built something strong. Together." The words hung between them, warm and steady. There were no grand declarations, no sweeping gestures. Just a quiet understanding of the life they had created, of the love that had grown out of their shared commitment. "I'm proud of you, Samuel," Sarah said, her voice steady. "For everything we've done, for everything we've built." Samuel smiled, his hand tightening around hers. "And I'm proud of you, Sarah. You're full of surprises. You always have been." She smiled at him, her heart swelling with affection. This was the life she had always wanted, steady, fulfilling, and built on trust and love. And now, as the seasons passed and the ranch continued to grow, Sarah knew that together they would face whatever challenges the future brought. The seasons rolled on, each one blending into the next with the steady rhythm of ranch life. Sarah and Samuel continued to work side by side, their bond growing stronger with every task they shared. The small watch repair shop in town flourished, bringing in more customers from across the state. Samuel's ranch expanded, his herd growing with the steady care he gave it. And through it all, they remained partners, in work, in life, and in love. As the months passed, Sarah found herself standing at the threshold of something she had never thought possible. A life where her talent was no longer something hidden away, but something that defined her, that contributed to the world around her. Every time she fixed a watch, every time a customer came back to thank her for her work, she felt a quiet satisfaction. She wasn't just a wife, she wasn't just a rancher's partner. She was Sarah Walker, the woman who could fix anything, no matter how small or intricate. The ranch had become a home in every sense of the word, not just a place where they worked and ate and slept, but a place where they found peace in the quiet moments, in the way their hands brushed as they passed each other in the kitchen, in the way they could talk without speaking, in the shared laughter after a long day. Samuel had become more than just a husband. He was her best friend, her confidant, the one person who truly saw her. One evening, after a long day of work, Sarah sat in her rocking chair, her hands resting in her lap as she gazed out at the setting sun. The sky was painted in soft hues of pink and orange, the light casting a golden glow over the land. Samuel stood by the window, his face creased with the lines of years spent in the sun, but his eyes still filled with that quiet strength that had drawn her to him all those months ago. He turned to her then, a slight smile on his face. "I was thinking," he began, his voice steady, "about how far we've come. When we started all this, I never could have imagined it would be like this." Sarah smiled softly, her gaze following his to the horizon. "Me neither. But I think I'm glad we did. I never thought I'd find a place like this. A place where I could be myself, where I could share my talents without fear." "You've built something here," Samuel said quietly, his voice filled with admiration. "Something that's not just about survival, but about living, about thriving." Her heart swelled at his words. He had always been supportive, always believed in her, even when she wasn't sure of herself. He had never asked her to change. Instead, he had encouraged her to be who she was, to pursue what made her feel alive. "You've given me a chance to do that," she said softly. "To be something more than I thought I could be." The silence between them was comfortable, the kind that came from years of understanding. They didn't need words to fill the space. They had built a life together, one brick at a time, and it was strong, unshakable. As the seasons continued to change, so did the landscape of their lives. The ranch grew, and with it, so did their family. Sarah found herself helping not just with the ranch, but with the business she had built, teaching Grace and the other young women in town how to repair watches, passing on the skills her father had taught her. Samuel had been right all along. Her talent was more than just a skill. It was a gift, one that could touch lives and change the world in its own quiet way. And through it, she had found her place. Not just as a wife, not just as a rancher's partner, but as a woman, with a purpose, with something to give. One morning, as they walked across the fields, their boots crunching in the frosty grass, Samuel turned to her, his face serious. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice low, "about the future, about us, and about what we want to do next." Sarah glanced up at him, her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" He smiled softly, his hand brushing against hers. "I think it's time we start thinking about what comes next. Not just for the ranch, but for the legacy we want to leave. I want us to keep building, keep growing. But I want it to be something that lasts, something that says we did it together." Sarah stopped walking, turning to face him. His words struck her, a deep sense of understanding blooming in her chest. "You're right," she said, her voice steady. "We've come so far, but there's more to do. And I want to do it with you, together." He smiled then, a genuine, open smile, the kind she had come to love. "I think we've got something special here, Sarah, and I want to keep growing it." They stood there for a long moment, looking out over the land they had built together, the ranch, the watch repair shop, the life they had created from scratch. The future was uncertain, as it always had been, but for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt completely certain of one thing. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The years passed, and their love only deepened. The ranch continued to thrive, and their family grew. The children began to take on more responsibility, learning the ways of the ranch and the craft of watch repair from Sarah. Grace opened her own workshop in town, and Sarah was proud to see her daughter carrying on the legacy of the family business. Samuel and Sarah, now older, found themselves taking more time to sit together on the porch, watching the sun set over the land. The quiet moments they had once shared were now a part of their everyday life. Their hands, worn and calloused from years of work, still found each other in the quiet of the evening. And as they sat together, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, Samuel turned to Sarah, his eyes filled with the same quiet love he had shown her all those years ago. "I'm glad you came here, Sarah," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm glad you said yes." Sarah smiled, her heart full. "I'm glad too, Samuel. I think I've always known that I was meant to be here. With you." Quote. They sat there in the fading light, hands intertwined, the future ahead of them, secure in the knowledge that whatever came, they would face it together. Their love, their partnership, had become the foundation of everything they had built. And that was something no storm, no challenge could ever take away.